The Black Liberators were a Black Power organization. You can even call them the revolutionary of the St. Louis streets. St. Louis answered to the Black Panther Party. They were a group that encouraged an entire city to demand more and be better. Beyond establishing a Black Power presence in the city, the Black Liberators also more clearly defined the relationship between police and the Black community of St. Louis. The St. Louis Police Department reaction to the Black Liberators directly led to the creation of the St. Louis Police Officers Association, which is the union arm of the St. Louis Police Department. In turn, the SLPOA shaped policing policy for the St. Louis region for decades that followed.
The Black Liberators first came onto the scene in 1968. The organization was patterned after the Black Panther Party, which originated in Oakland, California, and the Deacons of Defense, which operated in Mississippi and Louisiana. The Black Liberators were led by Charles Koen, who came to St. Louis from Cairo, Illinois, as a former organizer for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Koen organized the Black Liberators with young men from the Pruitt-Igoe Housing Projects and surrounding areas. And the organization boasted a 5-point program.
As early as July of 1968, the Black Liberators were getting into clashes with the police. When New York Congressman Adam Clayton Powell came to visit St. Louis, the Black Liberators provided security. When they took Powell on a tour of the inner city August 17, 1968, they were all armed. This raced along with the St. Louis Police Department. The police ended up arresting 2 Black Liberators on illegal weapon charges. The next major clash with the police occurred September 4th when Black Liberator leader Charles Koen and his second-in-command Leon Dent were pulled over by 2 police officers. The traffic stop became violent when the officers attacked Koen and Dent. They were then brought to the St. Louis police station, where they were attacked again by a total of 6 officers. Koen and Dent were hospitalized from the confrontation, with Koen sustaining broken bones in both hands along with head injuries. In reaction, citizens of St. Louis joined with supporters and members of the Black Liberators in a violent reaction that resulted in 2 shootings and a firebombing of the police station.
The police responded to that violence with more violence of its own, raiding the Black Liberators headquarters and destroying the organization's property in the process. They arrested more than 20 Black Liberators before the tension was eventually de-escalated through involving other community groups like Save Our City. There were 2 types of reactions to the battles between the Black Liberators and the St. Louis police, and each reaction depended on which side you supported. For the supporters of the Black Liberators, the reaction was a call for the development of a police civilian review board. This idea received support from a wide variety of people, from the head of the Human Development Corporation to the head of the St. Louis chapter of the NAACP to the members of Save Our City, a multiracial group developed to fight against violence.
If you supported the St. Louis Police Department, you advocated for tougher treatment of the Black Liberators and those that supported them. When the mayor of St. Louis authorized the suspension and fining of the officers involved in Koen and Dent's arrest and beating, those supporting the officers advocated resisting punishment. When the officers were suspended, other officers rallied around them for support. More than 250 officers met in Tower Grove Park to make clear that they would not accept being suspended by the city of St. Louis. The meeting led to additional meetings where the officers began exploring and creating a union to help protect them from such suspensions.
The persecution of St. Louis police officers in reaction to the beating of members of the Black Liberators was something they were not used to. They were used to operating without having to worry about facing consequences for beating people of color. At the meeting protesting their punishment, officers decided to band together and create the St. Louis Police Officer Association. This provided an additional layer of protection that further emboldened St. Louis police, and that was a major reform for the St. Louis Police Department.
As the police grew stronger out of the conflict with the Black Liberators, the Liberators grew weaker. After Koen and Dent initial arrest and the rounding of the Liberators in the days that followed, the organization gained public support. This came at the expense of prosecution and infiltration by the St. Louis police with the assistance of the FBI. Letters were sent to the significant others of Liberator members to create discourse in their homes, and informants were used to infiltrate the organization.
By the end of 1968, Charles Koen was forced out of the Black Liberators. His second-in-command, Leon Dent, would be arrested for the kidnapping and beating of Oscar King Jr. King was accused of working with the police and was the son of a St. Louis preacher. Another top liberator, Sam Petty of the infamous Petty Brothers, fled St. Louis with Black Panther H-Rap Brown and would eventually be captured in New York. With their top leadership gone, the organization elected Yusef Shabazz as the next leader, not knowing that Shabazz himself was an informant for the St. Louis Police Department. With an informant as its leader, the organization was effectively destroyed. Koen would go on to lead an armed resistance back in his hometown of Cairo, Illinois, and would spend the rest of his life fighting for equality and justice there. Dent would die in jail, with the prison declaring his suspicious hanging a suicide. Since the founding of the SLPOA in 1968, it's only become more powerful. It has served as the bargaining association for St. Louis city officers while offering protection of officers during incidents of police misconduct and brutality. As an organization, it continues to collect donations even today and uses those donations to wield political influence in their favor.
The rise and fall of the Black Liberators is significant in history for multiple reasons. As an organization, their strategy for combating racism, police brutality, and poverty in the inner city are still relevant today. The prosecution of St. Louis police officers in reaction of the beating of Black Liberators Charles Koen and Leon Dent led officers to create the St. Louis Police Officers Association. This created an additional layer of protection that further emboldened St. Louis police. In turn, that had led to an environment of tension between emboldened officers and frustrated citizens that accumulated in the Ferguson riot of 2014.
Do you remember the Black Liberators?
That may have been before my time.
Okay. Do you know about Charles, Dr. Reverend Charles Koen?
Tell us.
Okay. What was it, in the early, maybe the mid-60s, after the Black Panther Party started, Charles Koen got together, they wanted to form a group like that. They called themselves the Black Liberators. They went out and got a car and everything to patrol the police like they was doing in California. St. Louis police wasn't going for it. What they did was they whipped up on Charles Koen. Matter of fact, they almost killed him. They had him in intensive care and everything, and basically ran him. He was run out of St. Louis and came over to East St. Louis, where he stayed for a while. They started this group called the United Front. Then he went south to Cairo, where he continued to struggle up until they put him in jail. And he just died this past summer.